My fiancée cheated, so I gave her the ultimate wedding surprise. The air in the apartment still smelled faintly of Eleanor's favorite lavender candle, a scent that used to mean comfort and home. Now, it just felt like a lie. I stood frozen in the doorway of our shared bedroom, the one we'd picked out paint samples for just last month, the one where we'd lain awake countless nights whispering about our future, the future that felt like it was dissolving into dust before my eyes. On the floor, half hidden by the edge of the rumpled duvet, lay a crumpled piece of paper. Not just any paper. It was a receipt. From a boutique hotel downtown, a place we'd never been together. The date was circled in red ink. Last Tuesday night. The night Eleanor had told me she was pulling an all-nighter at the office, crunching numbers for a major client project. The night I'd brought her favorite takeout only to find her already asleep, claiming sheer exhaustion. The receipt wasn't just for a room. It was for a suite. And the name printed beside guest, Marcus, felt like a physical punch to the gut. Marcus. Her supposedly just a work friend, Marcus. The one she'd been texting more frequently lately, the one she dismissed as needy and a bit full of himself when I'd casually asked. My fingers trembled as I picked up the receipt, the cheap paper feeling impossibly heavy. The timestamp on the checkout was 3:17 a.m., way too late for a purely professional meeting. The image of her sleeping so soundly when I got home flashed in my mind. Had she just gotten back? Or had she been lying there replaying whatever had happened in that suite? The carefully constructed world I'd been living in, the shared dreams, the wedding plans humming along smoothly, the absolute trust I'd placed in her, shattered with a sound only I could hear, a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The lavender scent curdled, turning sickly sweet. The perfectly aligned photos on the dresser, us laughing on a beach, her beaming after getting the promotion, now looked like props in a play I hadn't known I was starring in. The engagement ring, still warm on my finger, felt like a brand. How long? The question screamed through my mind. How long had this been going on right under my nose? The meticulously organized wedding binder sitting on the desk, filled with color-coded tabs for vendors and guest list, seemed like a cruel joke. Every check mark, every deposit paid, felt like another nail in the coffin of my naivete. The betrayal wasn't just the act itself. It was the systematic dismantling of everything I thought our relationship was built on. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was gone, replaced by a gaping dark hole. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard fury that started in my chest and spread like ice through my veins. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was a declaration of war. And looking at that innocent-looking receipt, a plan dark and intricate began to form in the wreckage of my trust. They wanted a performance, they'd get one. The ultimate performance.
The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated stillness and furious internal storm. Eleanor, oblivious to the seismic shift beneath her feet, floated through the apartment with her usual radiant energy, chattering excitedly about final dress fittings and floral arrangements. I nodded, smiled, offered monosyllabic agreements, all while the receipt burned a hole in my pocket and Marcus's name echoed like a curse in my skull. Every touch, every affectionate gesture she offered felt like acid on my skin. Maintaining the facade of the devoted fiancé was the hardest acting job I'd ever done, requiring a level of emotional detachment I didn't know I possessed. I watched her, really watched her, for the first time in months. The way her eyes would sometimes glaze over when I talked about my day. The subtle flicker of irritation when my plans conflicted with hers. The extra time spent getting ready for work. The signs had been there, whispered warnings I'd chosen to ignore, blinded by love and the shiny future we were building. Now, they screamed at me. The anger was a constant low hum beneath the surface, a furnace I had to keep banked. But beneath the rage, a colder, more strategic instinct took hold. Simply confronting her, yelling, breaking things, that was too easy. That was what she might expect, a messy scene she could spin into me being unstable or overreacting. Now, this required something more. Something that would strip away her control, expose her lies in the most public, irreversible way possible. The wedding. The grand stage she'd meticulously planned, the day she'd dreamed of her entire life. That was the key. It was the perfect weapon. The venue was booked, the deposits paid, the invitations sent, over 200 guests expecting a celebration of love. What if instead they witnessed a revelation? What if the I do's were replaced with the truth? The idea began to crystallize, not as a vague fantasy, but as a detailed, terrifyingly achievable plan. It would require precision, nerves of steel, and allies. I needed people who could help me execute this without raising suspicion. My best friend, the one who'd known me since college and distrusted Eleanor on sight, was the obvious first call. Meeting him in a noisy coffee shop, I snooped the receipt across the table. His face hardened instantly, the easygoing smile vanishing. I laid out the bare bones of the plan, the fake ceremony, the moment of the truth. He didn't hesitate. "Count me in," he said, his voice low and grim. "Whatever you need." Next, I needed someone inside Eleanor's circle, someone who could provide crucial intel, and maybe even a distraction. Her cousin, who'd always been slightly jealous of Eleanor's perfect life, and who I knew had caught Marcus flirting at a family gathering, seemed like a potential weak link. A carefully worded text, hinting at concerns about Marcus's intentions and asking for her discretion, yielded a surprisingly eager response. She agreed to keep her eyes and ears open. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The anger was still there, a roaring fire, but now it was channeled. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about forcing her to face the consequences of her actions in front of the people who mattered most. The wedding was no longer her day, it was mine. And the surprise I had in store would make the receipt look like a love note. The plan, once a spark of fury-fueled inspiration, was rapidly becoming a complex operation. It required meticulous choreography, absolute secrecy, and a cast of unwitting and witting participants. The core of the deception rested on creating a believable, high-stakes scenario that would justify the presence of everyone and everything needed for the final act. My best friend, let's call him Ben, became my co-conspirator and chief strategist. We spent hours hunched over my laptop in a locked study, the wedding binder mockingly open on the desk beside us. We needed a reason to alter the ceremony significantly, something Eleanor would accept without suspicion. The answer came in the form of a fictional family tradition I invented, spun from whole cloth. I approached Eleanor one evening, affecting a mix of nostalgia and slight embarrassment. I explained that my late grandmother, whom Eleanor had never met but knew I adored, had always insisted that the most meaningful weddings included a personal, handwritten vow exchange before the main ceremony, witnessed only by the immediate family and the wedding party. It was a private moment, I claimed, to ground the couple before the public spectacle. To my utter lack of surprise, Eleanor ate it up. The idea of an exclusive, intimate pre-ceremony ritual appealed to her sense of drama and uniqueness. "Oh, that's beautiful," she exclaimed, already picturing the Instagram-worthy moment. "We can do it right before the main processional in the small chapel off the main hall. Perfect!" The small chapel. Secluded. Soundproofed. Ideal. With the venue secured for the crucial first act, we moved to the players. Eleanor's cousin, now fully on board after I shared irrefutable proof, a carefully blurred photo Marcus had foolishly sent Eleanor, which the cousin accidentally glimpsed, became my mole. She fed me snippets. Marcus was definitely coming to the wedding. Eleanor was nervous about him being there, but had assured him they'd be discreet. And crucially, she confirmed Eleanor had hidden a second phone, a burner most likely, in a locked box in her closet. That burner was the key. Ben took point on the technical aspects. We needed a way to capture everything, live. He sourced tiny, high-definition cameras disguised as decorative elements, a buttonhole flower for me, a brooch for the cousin, even a fake jewel for the centerpiece in the chapel. They'd feed to a secure server Ben set up. The most critical and risky part was hiring the actors. We needed 2 people to play my parents. My real parents were deceased, a fact Eleanor knew well, but the fictional tradition required that presence. Through a discreet agency recommended by Ben's film industry contacts, we hired a professional couple in their late 60s. They were briefed thoroughly. They were my beloved, slightly eccentric aunt and uncle from out of state, flown in specially for the tradition. Their role was simple: look proud, emotional, and utterly convincing. They rehearsed their parts, the tears, the proud smiles, with chilling professionalism. The final piece was the document. The ultimate surprise needed a tangible centerpiece. I drafted a single-page document. It wasn't angry. It was cold, factual, and devastating. It listed the dates, times, and locations of Eleanor and Marcus's known meetings, culled from the cousin's intel, my own surveillance, late-night drives past Marcus's apartment, and the damning digital trail from the burner phone we planned to access. It ended with a simple statement. "This is the truth you tried to bury. Today, you marry your lies." Ben had it printed on thick, expensive cream cardstock resembling a wedding program. 50 copies, enough for everyone in the chapel. The stage was set.
The actors were rehearsed. The evidence was prepared. The trap was baited. All that remained was walking down the aisle. The wedding day dawned unnervingly bright and clear, the kind of perfect June weather Eleanor had prayed for. The air in the bridal suite at the venue was thick with hairspray, perfume, and the nervous energy of the bridesmaids. I watched from a discreet distance as Eleanor, radiant in her designer gown, laughed and posed for photos. She looked every inch the blissful bride-to-be, the picture of innocence and joy. It was a masterpiece of deception, and it made my blood run cold. Ben, acting as my groomsman, gave me a barely perceptible nod as he adjusted his tie. The cousin, flitting around Eleanor with the bouquet, caught my eye and subtly tapped the small brooch on her lapel. The camera was active. My aunt and uncle arrived, greeted by Eleanor with effusive hugs and exclamations of how wonderful it was to finally meet them. They played their parts flawlessly, exuding warmth and a slightly bewildered pride that seemed entirely genuine. The time for the private tradition arrived. The main hall was still empty, guests milling outside or in the gardens. The wedding party, my fake relatives, Eleanor, and I gathered in the small, candlelit chapel. The atmosphere was intimate, hushed. Eleanor beamed, squeezing my hand. "This is so special," she whispered. "Thank you for sharing this with me." I managed a tight smile, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The officiant, a friend of Ben's, briefed on the real plan, stepped forward. He began speaking softly about love, commitment, and the importance of truth, words that hung heavy with irony. He guided us through the first part of the traditional vows, simple promises to love and cherish. Eleanor's voice was clear and confident, her eyes locked on mine, shining with what looked suspiciously like tears of happiness. Or was it guilt? I couldn't tell anymore. As we reached the point where we were supposed to exchange personal handwritten letters, another element of my fabricated tradition, I felt the weight of the folded document in my inner jacket pocket. It felt like a lead weight. Ben subtly signaled the cousin. She moved towards the door, ostensibly to check on something, but her real purpose was to ensure no one wandered in and to position herself for the next phase. The officiant smiled warmly. And now, as per this beautiful tradition, the couple will share their personal pledges to each other, witnessed by their closest loved ones. Eleanor reached into a small satin pouch hanging from her wrist and pulled out an envelope. Her expression was soft and expectant. I reached into my jacket. My fingers closed around the thick cream cardstock. This was it, the point of no return. The air in the chapel crackled with an energy Eleanor couldn't possibly comprehend. She saw only the romantic tableau she believed was unfolding. She saw the loving groom, the supportive family, the sacred space. She had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor, about to plummet into the abyss of her own making. I held her gaze, seeing only the reflection of the perfect bride she thought she was. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. The officiant nodded at me. It was time.
The officiant's gentle nod was the catalyst. The world seemed to slow down, every detail hyper-focused. Eleanor held her envelope, her expression a mixture of love and anticipation. My aunt dabbed at her eye with a lace handkerchief. Ben stood rigid, his jaw clenched. The cousin hovered near the door, a silent sentinel. I pulled the thick cream cardstock from my jacket, the movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes as she registered it wasn't a personal letter, not in the way she expected. "Before we share our personal words," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the chapel's hushed reverence, "there is something else that needs to be witnessed, something fundamental." I didn't look at her as I spoke. I looked at the officiant, then at Ben, then at the cousin. A silent signal passed between us. The officiant cleared his throat, his role shifting subtly. "Indeed," he said, his voice losing its gentle warmth and taking on a more formal, almost judicial tone. "Tradition also demands that we stand in the light of absolute honesty before making such solemn vows." Eleanor's confusion deepened, morphing into a dawning apprehension. She looked around the small chapel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the sudden tension radiating from the people she thought were her allies. Her bridesmaids exchanged uncertain glances. I unfolded the document. The crisp paper sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. "Eleanor," I began, my voice clear and cold, devoid of any warmth. "This is our witness, not to our love, but to your deception." I started reading. The first date, the boutique hotel, the timestamp, Marcus's name. Each word was a hammer blow. Eleanor's face drained of color, the radiant blush vanishing as if it had never been there. Her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in stark terror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, a desperate, reflexive denial. That's a mistake." I continued, relentless. The cousin's intel, the late-night calls traced to Marcus's number, the burner phone hidden in her closet, the dinner at the exclusive restaurant charged to Marcus's company card, the same night she told me she was having a girls' night in, the weekend getaway with her mother that coincided perfectly with Marcus's social media posts from a mountain resort 2 states away. I read it all, fact after damning fact, building an unassailable wall of truth around her. Her breath hitched. She looked wildly at the bridesmaids, at my aunt and uncle, her eyes pleading for someone to deny it, to call it a cruel joke. But they stared back, their faces masks of shock and dawning understanding. Ben stepped forward, holding up his phone. On the screen was a live feed from the cousin's brooch camera, currently focused on Eleanor's stricken face. And for those who need visual confirmation, we have documentation. The burner phone was accessed this morning. The messages are explicit. He didn't play them. He didn't need to. The implication was enough. Eleanor made a choked sound, a gasp that was half sob, half retch. Her knees buckled slightly. One of the bridesmaids instinctively reached out to steady her, then snatched her hand back as if burned. The illusion was shattered. The perfect bride, the perfect love story dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the ugly, undeniable truth. I finished reading, the final sentence hanging in the air. "This is the truth you tried to bury. Today, you marry your lies." I looked at her then, truly looked at her, seeing not the woman I loved, but the stranger who had betrayed me. "The wedding is off, Eleanor. Consider this your divorce decree." The silence in the chapel was absolute, broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing and the distant muffled music starting outside, the cue for the main processional. The guests were waiting. The show was just beginning.
The silence in the small chapel was a physical entity, thick and suffocating. Eleanor stood frozen, a statue carved from ice and horror. The expensive fabric of her wedding gown suddenly looking like a shroud. Her carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears that had begun to fall silently, tracing paths through the foundation. The bridesmaids were frozen too, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and revulsion. My aunt looked genuinely distressed, while my uncle placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. Then lowered his phone, the live feed disappearing. The cousin stood by the door, her face pale but resolute. The officiant cleared his throat again, the sound unnaturally loud. "Given these revelations," he said, his voice formal and devoid of any pretense of ceremony, "the union cannot proceed. The witness of this gathering acknowledges the dissolution of this engagement." He closed the small book he held with a soft snap that echoed like a gunshot. It was over. Legally, spiritually, in the eyes of the only people who truly mattered in that moment. But the plan wasn't finished. The main event was still waiting outside. Ben gave me another subtle nod. It was time. I turned and walked towards the chapel door, my steps measured and calm. Eleanor didn't move, didn't call out. She seemed broken, collapsed inwardly. As I pushed open the heavy oak door, the sound of the wedding march swelled, then abruptly cut off as the musicians saw my face, saw the procession behind me. Not a joyful wedding party, but a grim-faced group bearing the weight of a terrible secret. The murmur of over 200 guests fell silent instantly. Every head turned. Confusion rippled through the beautifully decorated hall. I walked to the small podium at the front, usually reserved for readings. Ben followed, placing a small laptop connected to a projector on it. The cousin discreetly moved through the stunned guests, handing out the cream cardstock documents, one to every family member, every bridesmaid, every groomsman, every close friend. Murmurs started again, confused whispers as people scanned the pages. I took a deep breath, facing the sea of expectant, then increasingly alarmed faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice amplified by the hall's acoustics, clear and cold. "Thank you for coming today to witness what was supposed to be the celebration of my marriage to Eleanor." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. Eleanor had emerged from the chapel doorway, leaning heavily on a bridesmaid, her face a ruin of tears and mascara. A collective gasp went through the crowd. That celebration, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces, including Eleanor's parents who looked utterly bewildered, will not be taking place, because the foundation of this marriage was a lie. I nodded to Ben. He clicked a key. The large screen behind me flickered to life. It showed a split screen. On one side, a clear image of Eleanor and Marcus entering the boutique hotel, time-stamped. On the other, a close-up of the incriminating receipt. Then the images began to cycle. Eleanor and Marcus laughing intimately at a restaurant. Marcus handing Eleanor a small gift-wrapped box. The blurred but unmistakable image of them kissing outside Marcus's apartment building. Each image was met with fresh gasps, cries of disbelief, angry murmurs. People looked from the screen to Eleanor, who swayed visibly. Her mother let out a small, wounded cry. Her father's face hardened into a mask of fury. I let the images speak for a moment, letting the visual evidence sink in, confirming the words on the pages now clutched in trembling hands throughout the room. Eleanor has been having an affair with Marcus, I stated, the name dropping like a stone into the silent hall. Heads whipped around, searching the crowd. Marcus, who had been sitting near the back looking smug, paled visibly and tried to shrink down in his seat. This isn't hearsay. This isn't jealousy. This is documented fact. I gestured to the screen, to the papers. The woman you came here to celebrate today is not who she pretended to be. She betrayed my trust, our love, and the sanctity of the commitment we were about to make in the most calculated and cruel way possible. I looked directly at Eleanor then. You wanted a perfect wedding day, Eleanor. You wanted everyone to see how happy you were. Consider your wish granted. Everyone sees you now. Everyone knows the truth. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't just shock anymore. It was the sound of a reputation shattering into a million pieces. The sound of trust irrevocably broken, not just between two people, but between a bride and her entire world. The ultimate surprise had been delivered.
The aftermath wasn't a single event, but a slow-motion unraveling that played out over the following days and weeks, echoing the initial shockwave in the wedding hall. Leaving the venue that day felt like walking through a nightmare made real. Eleanor's wails, her parents' devastated shouts, Marcus trying to slip out the side door only to be confronted by Eleanor's furious brother. It was a cacophony of betrayal and anger that followed me out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. Ben drove me home in silence, the weight of what we'd done hanging heavy between us, a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound sorrow. The apartment, once a shared sanctuary, felt like a museum of a life that had never truly existed. I packed my belongings methodically, the lavender scent now just a background odor, devoid of meaning. Every item I placed in a box felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she had tried to steal. The wedding gifts piled high in the corner were returned with a simple printed note. The wedding has been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Thank you for your understanding. It was the understatement of the year. The fallout was public and brutal. Social media exploded. Screenshots of the presentation, blurry photos taken in the hall, the cousins' whispered accounts. It all went viral within hours. Eleanor became a cautionary tale, a meme for infidelity. Her professional reputation took a nosedive. Whispers of poor judgment and untrustworthiness followed her. Marcus was fired from his job when the company discovered he'd been expensing their rendezvous. The wedding vendors, initially furious about the cancellation, became surprisingly sympathetic once the story leaked, many waiving significant fees. Eleanor's family, initially supportive, became fractured. Her mother struggled to reconcile the daughter she knew with the actions revealed. Her father reportedly hasn't spoken to her since. The cousin became an unlikely confidant, torn between family loyalty and the disgust she felt for Eleanor's actions. As for me, the immediate satisfaction was undeniable. Seeing the shock on her face, watching the lies crumble in real time, knowing she couldn't spin this narrative, it was a powerful, if cold, form of justice. But the victory felt hollow in the quiet moments. The anger that had fueled me for weeks began to ebb, leaving behind a vast aching emptiness. The shared dreams, the inside jokes, the comfort of her presence next to me at night, all gone, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal. I hadn't just exposed her, I had destroyed the life I thought I was building. It was necessary, but it was also deeply painful. Moving on was a deliberate act of will. I changed my number, blocked her and her inner circle on all platforms, and focused on work, on therapy, on rebuilding the parts of myself I'd neglected in the shadow of the relationship. Ben was a constant anchor, his unwavering friendship a lifeline. Slowly, the raw edges began to soften, the anger transformed into a kind of weary acceptance, a recognition that sometimes the only way to heal is to cut out the rot completely, no matter how deep the wound. Years later, the memory of that day still has the power to sting, a sharp reminder of a profound betrayal. But the sting is dulled now, replaced by a hard-won sense of self-preservation. I learned that trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered, and that the person you love most is capable of the deepest deception. I learned that revenge, while momentarily satisfying, doesn't erase the pain. It just shifts its shape. Most importantly, I learned that the ultimate surprise isn't just about exposing someone else's lies. It's about finding the strength to walk away from the wreckage, to leave the empty aisle behind, and to build something new, brick by painful brick, on a foundation of your own hard-earned truth. The wedding never happened, but the ending, in its own brutal way, was final. And finally, I was free.